Greetings, everyone. I'm Wes Fisher, and I am co-chair of the International Association for Impact Assessment's Climate Change section. And I wish we were all in Tallinn. Beautiful, historic city known as the Silicon Valley of the Baltic Sea, and also the European Green Capital Award winner for 2023. I want to thank Ross and Lotta and Heike for asking me to speak to the forum. It's a real privilege. I think the discipline and focus and creativity and ethical standards SEA practitioners follow can guide the selection of the best alternatives for action in the major transformations all of us have to make over the next 3 decades. And I've been asked to provide a few observations on how we might better promote the use of our knowledge and skills to address the critical challenges ahead. My topic is, how can we be braver? A call to action. Here's an observation on courage from a Danish philosopher who challenged convention. So what does it mean to dare? Keep your footing through practice and more practice. Train yourself in the how. Know what to do and what to avoid, know where to try and when to make the attempt. But keep in mind, being brave doesn't equate with being wise. Being brave requires discipline, focus, and practice, but also the willingness to take risks, personal or societal. How does a risk taker maximize the chances of successful and significant outcomes while minimizing the odds of a setback, or worse? You start by knowing the terrain, scientific and cultural. You plan your route, the what, when, and where, and you listen and study well. I'm going to touch on 7 topics: our planetary predicament, and why does SEA not receive greater political traction and financial support? Then I'll talk about how do we support a more rapid return to biosphere stability and efforts to demonstrate the high value of SEA to decision makers, media professionals, and the public. We'll talk a bit on making Tallinn Forum member engagement count, and just focus on one area. There are many, but focus on SEAs for city development planning and urban planners. And there's a topic that is of interest to me, a possible role for strategic environmental and social impact assessment in examining the consequences of alternative consumption and resource use tax policies. And then we'll summarize thoughts on how to respond to our grand predicament. Many of you are probably familiar with planetary boundary concepts developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center, which assists Earth scientists and Earth system specialists in visualizing the state of the biosphere. This slide's courtesy of Sarah Cornell, who leads the center's current research on planetary boundaries. And some of the key planetary boundary conditions include climate change and ocean acidification, mainly due to CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gases like methane, biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation, perturbed biogeochemical cycling. This is mainly the release of nitrogen and phosphorus from global agricultural activities, land use and land cover change, freshwater abstraction, systemic chemical pollution, altered atmospheric physics and chemistry. You can see from this visual representation which of the planetary boundary conditions researchers estimate have been exceeded and others that are considered of significant concern. The 4 boundaries researchers believe have been crossed and present the greatest threat are shown in orange-brown in the graphic. They are biodiversity loss, climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, perturbed biological cycling of nitrogen and phosphorus, which I mentioned is primarily associated with human agricultural activities, and land use and land coverage change. There are others not shown on this list. For example, emerging technologies which could have unknown and sudden profound effects on the biosphere. Many argue that world population will stabilize through greater equity, increases in standards of living, technological and agricultural advances, and education, especially for women and girls. But the stark reality is there are about 900 million of us living in slums. That's equivalent to 90 megacities of 10 million people each. And by 2030, it's estimated that 1 in 4 of us will live in a slum or other informal settlement, which makes me ask if SEA practitioners and the Tallinn Forum might potentially play a role in examining alternative family planning incentives, perhaps through groups like the Population Council. A new documentary on planetary boundary conditions and potential solutions features Sir David Attenborough and former director of the Stockholm Resilience Center, Johan Rockström, entitled Breaking Boundaries, the Science of Our Planet. It's a particularly important film for all of us, especially for politicians, religious leaders, and students, though it doesn't grapple directly with the issue of human population and reaching the Earth's carrying capacity for our species, which appears to be a glaring reality. Attenborough was a prominent speaker at COP26. Is there any inference to be made here? On the left is a depiction of wildlife species lost since 1970, showing a 68% decline by 2016. Here, the graphs for invertebrates and for plants, the plant species, also look like this. While these precipitous declines are occurring, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of EIA and SEA publications through 2020. So has the growth in assessments helped to stem the loss in species, the collapse in biodiversity, or a loss of ecosystem integrity? Do we fully grasp how serious this is? And if so, what do we do next? This is the next topic. Why does SEA not receive greater political traction and financial support? Well, across history, political philosophers and anthropologists and economists have been aware that our species creates hierarchical social systems whose stability depends on broad acceptance involving law, cultural and religious norms, rewards and punishments, and the exercise of military or economic power. If SEAs, CEAs, and strategic plans don't support established interests, their requirements in management plans may be temporarily or permanently exempted, underfunded, manipulated, delayed, opposed, or ignored. And many of you as SEA practitioners have seen these forces at play and have had your ethical standards tested. How many effective long-term cumulative effects assessments are you aware of? I know of almost none. Why is that? There are at least 2 other reasons for lack of support. Those with vested interest tend not to react well to calls for major change. And the louder the calls, the more forceful and undemocratic the response may be. What does this mean for transparency and public participation in SEA and CEA practice, or for the engagement of SEA practitioners in policy and program development at the early concept stage? And from my own background as a biologist, I'd say it's not characteristic of our species to fully grasp the consequences of our actions over long time horizons or to plan ahead, especially beyond 2 generations. This is the next topic. How do we support a more rapid return to biosphere stability? Very positive public and private sector interests are now in play, which in spite of strong resistance are creating transformational change. Youth and students and their assessments of the future will become a major factor in restoring biosphere stability. While many existing centers of political, economic, and personal power remain locked in patterns of unsustainable growth, the arguments in favor of maintaining a sustainable commons and biosphere are reaching a wider and wider audience, with major shifts in the financial and corporate world now taking place. This Darwinian leap, as I call it, or quantum jump in societal change, shows itself in enlightened political and economic and financial leaders, the reinsurance industry, the academic and corporate world, science journalists, and educated populations. Other positive developments. Still more evidence of a positive shift in public and private behavior. There's a network called the Climate Pledge to reach net zero carbon by 2040. That's 10 years earlier than 2050 target. There are 201 businesses who have accepted the challenge, and the challenge partners include the Nature Conservancy, We Mean Business, Race to Zero, TED Countdown, and the Science Based Targets Initiative, and the Small and Medium Enterprise Climate Hub. I have one more editorial comment on our efforts to return to biosphere stability. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. I strongly agree with Mandela's statement, and I've added my own comment beneath his. The health of democratic societies is significantly affected by the degree to which their voting populations are grounded in critical thinking and ethical behavior from youth to adult, especially youth. SEA supports both. Without basic skills in critical inquiry, public perceptions can easily be influenced by entities that dispense social, political, economic, or religious distortions or myths. Next topic, efforts to demonstrate the high value of SEA to decision makers, media professionals, and the public. And I'm really only going to focus on the situation with our IAI climate change section. Like your efforts at the Tallinn Forum, we see the urgent need for action, and after years of effort, we continue to encounter decision makers in the public who have only a limited understanding of how to proceed in a way that incorporates the do no harm and ethical principles of impact assessment into the need for a major, rapid, and efficient transition to a sustainable global economy. Major focus of the IAI climate change action plan has been on efforts to reach beyond our own profession and build collaborative relationships with environmental law organizations, financial institutions, insurance, reinsurance industry, risk assessment specialists, urban and regional planners and decision makers, and environmental journalists. In part, the selection of the climate change of our section's 4 focus areas is a result of a decade-long effort to prioritize the value of working with specific partners, and then assessing how much IAA volunteers can actually accomplish, and also working within the limits of IAI's budget and staff as a nonprofit organization. The reality of being bolder for SEA Tallinn Forum practitioners these are the same questions members of the IAI climate change section face. How much time can you spend in an advocacy role? For most SEA practitioners, advocacy doesn't pay the bills. What happens to your career and personal life if you're bolder? And if you turn to advocacy, which actions and partnerships might have the most significant effects on the trajectory of biosphere restoration. We know that throughout history, reform has often placed reformers at high personal risk. This is the next topic, promoting SEAs. There are many areas where Tallinn Forum members' expertise can make a difference. I'm focusing on just one, collaboration with city development planning and urban planners. Well, I do this. Here's part of the reason. According to the World Bank Urban Development Overview, the world's cities contain over 4 billion people, more than half the global population. The urban population is 9 times larger than it was just 100 years ago. Urban growth is expected to continue, more than doubling to greater than 9 billion of us, with nearly 7 of 10 people in the world living in cities by 2050. And currently, urban areas consume 2/3 of the world's energy and create over 70% of global CO2 emissions. Here's a visual depiction of urban growth since 1950. Note that more than 2/3 of the world will be urban in 2050. Back in 1950, it was 30%. And you can see that by 2050, it rises to 68%. C40 is a network of megacities committed to addressing climate change. Megacities are defined as cities with populations of over 2 million. The major force in addressing climate change, C40 cities, notes that significant accomplishments in climate change mitigation and adaptation can be attributed to city mayors being, and this is a quote, directly accountable to their constituents for the decisions and for being more nimble than state and national elected officials to take decisive action. What our cities do individually and in unison to address climate change can set the agenda for communities and governments everywhere. So these mega cities over 10 million are like Lagos, Tokyo, or New York, and there were 10 back in 1990. And the number will have increased to 43 in 2030. But Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, has played a key role in the founding and direction of the network. This year's Tallinn Forum is meant to encourage debate on the actions and strategies that SEA and planning professionals should be taking and where SEA can contribute to better decision-making. Based on the accountability and responsiveness of many urban mayors, the existence of effective urban planning bodies and city development plans, SEA practitioners may find that urban and land use planners are particularly receptive to collaboration and the integration of SEA and CEA processes in strategic plans. This diagram is from an IAPA paper co-authored by Maria Partidario, our former IAI president, recipient of IAI's Lifetime Achievement Award and a Tallinn Forum member. Prepared back in 2008, it's entitled Linking Strategic Environmental Assessment and City Development Strategy in Vietnam. So Maria saw early on the high value of collaboration between urban planners and SEA practitioners. The Tallinn Forum can continue to facilitate this kind of collaboration and partnership through global city networks that are focused on climate change mitigation and adaptation, environmental and social development strategies, and environmental justice. There are many large and effective groups, and I'm only going to mention a few. Cities Alliance is a global partnership fighting urban poverty and supporting cities to deliver sustainable development, and it's hosted by the United Nations Office for Project Services. Here's an example of the Cities Alliance product just completed by another of our highly respected SEA practitioners, Bryony Walmsley of the Southern African Institute for Environmental Assessment. Rohani examined the application of SEA in city development planning in Southern Africa. And she came away with the same sense of frustration Tallinn Forum members have, that much more needs to be done to promote the value of SEA processes in city development plans. Another very important group, the largest global alliance for city climate change leadership across the globe. And of course, there's UN Habitat. I wanted to mention this conference. It's organized by UN Habitat and the Global Covenant of Mayors. It was held in October of this year. There were over 7,000 registered participants in 220 sessions. And if you go to this site, you can find all the presentations, all the sessions on YouTube. This publication, C40 Cities, is not just for mega cities. Could this have contained CEA guidance? This is another group. Local Governments for Sustainability is a global network of more than 2,500 local and regional governments committed to sustainable urban development. And this announces their ICLES World Congress in May of 2022, which will be held in Malmö, Sweden. And closer to the Tallinn Forum, I asked Ross Marshall if he could give me a few examples of recent collaboration between SEA practitioners and urban planners, and he suggested looking at Scotland, especially Edinburgh, but also other cities, North Lancashire, Dumfries and Galloway and Aberdeen. I should mention that three of my closest IAI colleagues have recently reduced their involvement in IAA matters to focus more of their energy on using their impact assessment skills to work with cities and city planners. Two of them, John Boyle and Phil Byer, are located in the Vancouver area. Peter Kroll is based in Ottawa. A couple of very promising new developments for potentially improving SEA and CEA environmental and social standards and requirements. One of them is linking SEA and CEA to IUCN global standards for nature-based solutions. This first edition of the IUCN standards for nature-based solutions came out in 2020 after exhaustive technical development and review. Meeting nature-based solutions standards could become a part of SEA and CEA conditions and mitigation strategies and management plans. The second very promising development is the Science-Based Targets Initiative. It brings together approximately 1,800 business leaders and 1,000 companies, all using science-based targets to reach the 2050 target. This is a new group, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ. It was launched in April 2021 by former Bank of England Chief Mark Carney and current UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. And it promises to follow scientific guidelines for cutting carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. It consists of over 400 financial firms across 45 countries, handling assets of over 130 trillion. And Bloomberg and Mary Shapiro, former head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, also a Bloomberg associate, are members of the governing board. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development is another global organization of over 200 businesses. At COP26, they issued their business manifesto for sustainable development. It isn't clear from the manifesto whether the members will impose the rigor of GFANZ or the Science-Based Targets Initiative, or if they've signed on to the climate pledge, net zero carbon by 2040. It'll be critical for these actions to add up to more than public relations and greenwashing, so as to represent genuine corporate movement towards biosphere stability. Now for a topic I want to raise, even though defining the role of SEA practitioners may be more difficult. Is there a role for SEA in examining the consequences of alternative consumption and resource use tax policies? Well, in the US, 3,623 economists from all over the political spectrum, including 28 Nobel laureates, have declared that a carbon tax offers the most cost-effective lever to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed necessary. Really. Politicians and the public have a knee-jerk reaction to taxes, but perhaps SEA practitioners and economic analysts to join forces to demonstrate how dividends, credits, and other incentives can shift consumer and private sector behavior in favor of genuine nature-based solutions. Assessing carbon may generate the revenue to provide these dividends or credits, provide a social safety net, and help clear national debts. So what does all this mean for Tallinn Forum SEA advocates? First, we need to be able to sit down with the cook before the menu's decided, not be brought to the table when the diners are about to be fed. There's summary thoughts on how to respond to our grand predicament. Stay involved with groups like the Tallinn Forum and IAIA to expand your knowledge and professional practice and discipline. But in this time of emergency, we'll all have to do more. Talking to ourselves is important, but doesn't address why our work receives so little attention beyond our own circle of associates and supportive clients. That's why the goal of the Tallinn Forum is so important, getting planners and SEA practitioners together early on when concepts first take shape, not after designs become done deals. To have an impact, we've got to take our skills beyond our professional IAI affiliations, as I'm sure many of you are already doing. Find a group that's action-oriented and jump in. Are they a dynamic planning institution, an effective environmental law group, a network of financial institutions, or reinsurance specialists, risk analysts, or city planning bodies, student activists, or journalists? Any of these groups can benefit from your SEA knowledge and discipline. And I emphasize this point, push for opportunities to train these groups in the basics of SEA. Remember to marshal your time and energy carefully so you don't lose your grip. For example, my Tallinn Forum members begin by reaching out to a group like Cities Alliance or GFANZ. I think that's our way together. I hope this presentation has made clear how important your profession is to our future and the value of the Tallinn Forum's continuing efforts to build partnerships with other like-minded organizations, trying to improve strategic planning and decision-making in Europe and beyond. I'd like to end with a poem. Together, when certain seems no longer so, when glaciers melt and souls are shaken, then with creativity, love, and common purpose, will broken be reformed in emergent beauty that astounds. There are unfettered branches reaching those living and those to come. Be bolder still, our voices given to the voiceless and the meek, reminding all that the laws of nature prevail, while the precepts of wealth and power are but the dust of Mars. Thanks, everyone. And here are my coordinates. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to a very successful forum. Bye.